Hello, hello, hello. This is exciting because I get to sit down. Right, my lovely panel who are joining us right now. We've got Kristina Skogvard, who is the marketing manager from Abios. And then we have Alex Inglot, he's the commissioner of ESL Pro League. Sorry, Marcus Schön in the middle, I'm so sorry. I literally looked to my right and I saw Alex, apologies. Marcus from 9. And then we have, right at the end, we have Patrick Sättermon, who is the co-founder and chief gaming officer of Fnatic. Thank you so much for joining me today, guys. I feel like the way we could introduce this panel, given that we're talking about the future of Counter-Strike 2 esports, is by actually looking backwards and talking about our first memories of Counter-Strike. Because I think it's such a long-running, beloved IP, and I know some of us have been doing it for over 20 years. So for me, for example, mine was when I was 16, and my then boyfriend, it didn't last, had built himself one of those tiny PCs, and he put Counter-Strike on it, and him and his friends used to go to a LAN cafe, and you'd have to sign a permission form to stay overnight. So I played a couple of rounds of Counter-Strike, and then he removed me from the PC, and wouldn't let me give my permission slip to my mum. He was like, "You're not coming with us," and I think it's because I was good. That's all I'm saying. So that's my first experience. I think it was probably like 1.6 those. Kristina, what about you?
Yeah, well, I've played Counter-Strike and Valorant and a lot of games, in esports for quite some time. I work in the industry for a couple of years now. So I obviously work for Abios, an esports and data provider. So I mean, we work with different partners in the industry, from teams to sports books to, different stakeholders. So it's all about trying to gather data and see where we can help different stakeholders get the most out of esports and, really build the business models around that. So yeah, that's what I do.
Marcus?
Okay, so first memory of Counter-Strike. I guess that was when I was about 9 years old. I just had got my first computer from my parents. It ran on Windows 98. Had like this shitty internet, and I was trying to connect to a game. And just before I had connected, there was this huge loud AWP shot that like knocked me off the stool. And that was like, I think that was Counter-Strike 1.0, I think. I'm not sure actually about the dates. It was early 2000s. But that was some time ago. I've mostly been a Counter-Strike fan, an eSport fan, and for 1.5 years now I'm the CFO of 9. So I've been coming from like the banking industry in Sweden. So mostly an eSport fan, now actually working with it.
Alex?
Yeah, I'm a bit self-conscious, kind of sandwiched between these OGs, but I first came across esports when I worked at Sport Radar, who did a big integrity partnership with ESL back in 2015. And they invited me to Cologne for my first sample. So they dropped me in straight at the deep end. And I saw the Brazilian roster take the trophy, the major. And yeah, it was like, for me, mind-blowing to see that this whole subculture that I genuinely hadn't really even noticed was as big and as developed and as passionate as it was, and it kind of never looked back since then.
All right. I think I got access to Counter-Strike first time in '99, so we were all worried about antivirus, what's going to happen when we turn clock into the 2000s. Age 13 probably at that point. I was already quite of an avid gamer, played Quake, some of the early days FPSs, but what I would probably describe more now, little did I know then, but it was quite life-defining in a sense, like the career path that came after that, obviously many years later, because it was impossible, it wasn't even a thing to be professional or even aspiring, but it was just so damn fun. And Sweden happened to be quite early and trend-setting when it comes to broadband, home computers, tax breaks and stuff like that. It was a constant fight with my brother. Thankfully he was not that excited in computers in the end, but yeah, I just played all the time, and it shone on the telephone bill because it was modem days back then. So a lot of things have changed. So I'm kind of looking back at 24 years of Counter-Strike with 4 iterations. As a player, as a coach, as a team manager, as a co-founder of a organization.
Patrick, given that you have literally witnessed every transition between the different versions of Counter-Strike, now we've moved to CS2. They had to really switch us from CSGO because otherwise the players wouldn't start practicing on CS2. So it's definitely something that had to happen. But how long do you expect the transition period to be for CS2 to really feel like an end product that only needs tweaks as opposed to like major updates? It feels really, has that competitive integrity we know and love from CSGO.
Yeah, I mean, the difference to when we swapped into CSGO, I mean, I see similarities. Looking at the Twitter feed, actually Twitter also existed back then, obviously way less active, but the professionalism and the constructiveness of today's pro players, I think it's remarkably high, with some exceptions, of course. We have to remember for the players, for the coaches, for the staff, for the organizations, Counter-Strike is our sports, right? So suddenly overnight, Steam doesn't update, here comes a new game, but it's not as, you know, it's not so different to what was in terms of like Counter-Strike 1.6 to CSGO. That was a completely new game. At the same time, now when we leave CSGO behind, you can't longer play CSGO, and that was the thing early days Counter-Strike. There was like two titles coexisting at the same time. Sports integrity, I mean, a topic very close to my heart. I think you would obviously over time see the game developing in all sorts of ways. There are a lot of conversation now about script, subtick. I'm not going to go super nitty-gritty here, but I'm honestly very excited to know that and why not, obviously, the game is making a lot of money, it's as a global following, etc. But Valve is coming out like, here's Counter-Strike 2, a new title, we have 11 years behind us in CSGO, really committing for the future. Whereas it's important that the pro players are part of that journey. I think it's a vital piece in the puzzle. We also have to remember the boost I envision, a new title, more fit with today's graphic engines and whatever have you. That I think going to be it's going to be a plus at the end of the day. But it's going to be some challenging moments ahead. I am not jealous to be a tournament organizer now, because I imagine it's a lot of technical stuff to have in mind all the time.
Yeah, I mean, when I first played the new version of Nuke, I was like, can I lick the floor? It's so shiny, it's so beautiful. Alex, how have ESL got ready for Intel Extreme Masters Sydney? Because the playoffs are about to kick off down under. In fact, no, they've already kicked off because obviously the time difference. But that must have been quite the challenge to be the first tournament organizer to run a CS2 event.
Yeah, I think Valve tried to do the best they could in the circumstances. So obviously, we learned at EPL 17 that they had already been talking with the talent to try and make sure that the game, even pre-launch, was at a certain level. Then they did the testing with the pro players. There was a lot of feedback. There were a lot of patches, like almost one every 2 days, every 3 days. So I think they really tried to do the best to make sure that when they flipped the switch, that it was as close to ready to roll as possible. That doesn't mean it was ever going to be perfect. I think there are, as Patrick said, things to iron out. But I think the receptiveness of the players to understand that transition period, the receptiveness of Valve to the feedback, as long as it's constructive, is really important. But we had the problem where it flipped in the middle of EPL 18, and there was a significant question like, do we make the move like now, along with everyone else, or do we play on a pinned CSGO version? And it was felt, to come back to your point about competitive integrity, someone who had won in Group A would have the time to practice than someone who was on Group D and qualified who'd have no time to practice. So we felt that actually, while there was a huge appetite to, everyone wanted to jump on the bandwagon, for this event, where we had 1.5 weeks left to go, it was fair that if you won in CSGO, you would finish in CSGO. That doesn't mean that coming into Sydney, it hasn't been challenging, but I think everyone was ready, and everyone understands that the game needs to see the sunlight in order for some of the bugs, not just in the game, but also in the production area, backstage, for those things to be ironed out. Now we don't need to worry about it after Sydney until Katowice, so we've got a bit of runway from here on in, but it's always nice to be the first, and kind of we feel like we're the first tier 1 event that took CS2 forward, and it's actually gone a lot smoothly than we anticipated.
Yeah, I haven't seen any shade on Twitter whatsoever. Everyone's been really positive, but also it's Sydney. Some of the best esports fans in the world. They're so grateful to have IEM back that they're just going to be writing how much they love the tournament on pizza boxes, I'm sure, this weekend. Kristina, you are our numbers expert. Have you got any interesting numbers from the CSGO era that maybe potentially reflects on how big CS2 could be?
Well, as everyone knows, CSGO is one of the biggest esports in the world right now. And like if we look at CSGO, the first major back in 2013, in Jönköping, Sweden, ever since then, CSGO has really grown in terms of viewership and player base, like almost year on year. And it spiked during the pandemic at the 2021 Stockholm PGL major, which now we won. And after that, sure, like the viewership has declined some, but you could say that after the pandemic, the scene really opened up, so there was lots of tier 1 CS content, and since there was so much to watch, like maybe the peak viewership couldn't reach the same heights for every competition, but it has definitely been a lot of content, and like some say that the scene has become a little bit more stale since it's like the same big teams sort of playing in every competition, and as such, I think that now when Valve is sort of changing the rules for tournament organizers, like that definitely opens up for more players in the scene. If this, like what this says about CS2, it's a bit hard to say now because, it's still really new, and, as from a competitive standpoint, like even, Carrigan from FaZe, he's like, yeah, the game is like 4 out of 10 finished right now, so I mean, there's definitely some nuts and bolts that need to be fixed, like, Shakira peaks and whatnot in the game. But, like, I think that this period, up until the next major, will truly be like a trial and error period where Valve will receive feedback from, teams, players, and tournament organizer to ultimately build a perfect event for the next major. So that's really where I think we will be able to see how CS2 performs and what it has in store for the future. So I'm very excited to see where this leads us.
Whenever I hear Valve mentioned, I get very excited. If there's rumors that Valve are at an event, at a CS event, everyone's just like, which room are they in? Where are they? Marcus, as a team CEO, do you actually get to talk directly to Valve and give them your feedback?
Yeah, we do, some teams, but I wouldn't say that we as Nine has a direct contact with them, but of course, like in terms of being competing in EPL, for instance, that we can definitely give our feedback for sure, yeah.
There are so many events in the CS calendar. It's been this way for years, but one of the biggest things that's going to be happening with this new era of CS2 is, I believe it's 2024, that's when Valve have decided they want to make sure that the tournament circuit is as open as possible. That means the end of partnership agreements, so the Louvre agreement with ESL, so the partner teams in events like ESL Pro League, and also the Blast partnership teams. So these tournament organizers, they run structures where there's open qualifiers, and then there are teams that are guaranteed invites. Now, the Valve changes. Marcus, I want to come to you first, because your team is not a partner team. So how did you react to these changes, and how do you think they are going to affect the ecosystem in Counter-Strike 2?
Well, to be honest, from our perspective, this is a bigger change than from CSGO to CS2, and especially like in my role as a CFO, also from like an economic standpoint, this is much more interesting from my point of view than CSGO to CS2. I mean, CS2 in all its glory, but this is really interesting, I think. Now, of course, like we view on this change in great excitement, and I'm sure like all other non-partner teams are excited as well. And as you said, Kristina, like we're probably going to see a little bit more dynamic scene. With that being said, I'd say the vast majority of the partnerships teams today do have their spots, rightfully so, because they're really great teams. So I wouldn't say like we're going to flip all of the landscape and see totally new teams, but we're definitely going to see more like Cinderella stories. And I mean, I kind of feel like we have seen that in 2023 as well, with the likes of us, for instance, with Apex, Game Legion, maybe had theirs a little bit earlier though. But sure, all of us are looking at this with great excitement and seeing like, this is going to be great. At the same time, I'd say like, all of us in the scene want stability, right? So we kind of want to know in let's say 12 to 18 months, what kind of events will we be playing, and as much planning that we can do, the better for all of us, I'd say, like tournament organizers, teams, like sponsors, everyone wants to know what's happening up ahead. So it's going to be interesting to see how this will all pan out, I think.
Is that nerve-wracking for you though, Patrick, because as a partnered team, suddenly potential revenue share is no longer there?
Yeah, I think we are
quite different to some of the other partners team in that we are only in one of the 2 partner leagues, whereas this, from what we can tell right now, we will maybe create some hurdles around the corner when it comes to predictable revenues, tournament scheduling, and so forth. But the kind of sporting heart of mine and the organization is looking at this as a positive thing at the end of the day, because we would have completely equal sporting opportunity than any other, tier 1 organization. Thankful you said what you said in terms of like there are some orgs that has kind of been there, done that, a bit of a founding member of the ecosystem. So I don't feel any it's no controversy that we have created a project. I think we've done so much great work in terms of regulation, driving value for today's and tomorrow's players. Fnatic as an organization, I think we've gone through 200 to 300 players and professionalized those over the years, right? And that comes at a cost, right? Not so much sitting here saying we're entitled, but many things to still be figured out, various stakeholders to have in mind. But we should expect more exciting stories, teams coming from nowhere, making it big, and they can stay on the top. That's always a challenge in today's Counter-Strike. We're likely going to see more tournament organizers trying their luck. There are some great names out there, you will know whom already, but I think it's been quite limited in that regard the last few years. I think COVID has an attribute to that as well. But let's also remember, it's a very, very, very saturated ecosystem, and I think we're very poor right now in the storytelling, so how do we go about that? As a Counter-Striker, I've been in the title for like 25 years. To some degree, I'm more excited about the League of Legends events because there's so few of them. So Worlds going on in Korea now is like just so damn exciting because it's that very defining moment of the year. How do we do that going forward? It's already a challenge.
So what would you suggest then? Do you think there should be less big events in the calendar and more of a run-up, a bit like with the major cycles where we have the minors or the RMR events, I should call them now?
It's a tough one. I think you can't achieve that really if it's going to be completely open and everyone can do what they want, more or less, right? So we have to see. I don't dare to predict the future too much. What I sincerely hope, though, is that the arrival of CS2, a new way of operating tournaments and maybe lowering some of the barriers that some tournament organizers and some teams might see, that will generate greater following, more success stories from regions that aren't as representative right now. I'm thinking about Asia, I think about Africa, I think about Middle East, etc. I think that is very exciting. We call it Counter-Strike 2 now, right? But Counter-Strike Global Offensive, with all respect to some of those territories, but it was very much at the end a very European CIS affair. Whereas the Counter-Strike I kind of grew up with was always like, yeah, we're going to see a Chinese team, they're going to go to the finals, they're going to make a podium placement. That happens now and then, but I'd like to see more of that, and we all have a role to play in that.
Alex, do you already see the ecosystem changing within ESL and EFG in terms of Counter-Strike events in the future?
I think the fundamental philosophy behind the Louvre agreement was that we wanted to bring the teams closer to the involvement in how we build the ecosystem. And I think we established that and we managed to achieve that. The change, I think Marcus is right, there are some changes, but it's not seismic. So the Louvre agreement had 4 components. One was guaranteed entry into the Pro League. That obviously goes. So that's one pillar's gone. The second pillar was about revenue share, giving those who participate in the event an ability to share in the spoils of what we've built, whether it's revenue from broadcast, revenue from sponsorship. That is still a possibility. It just needs to be open to everyone who participates. So I would argue that's not a big seismic change. Third issue was governance. We gave them a seat at the table to really help mold the ecosystem in the tournament. While we may not have a formal structure as we had under the Louvre agreement, the fact that we have those channels and that trust and that closer relationship will continue. So I would argue that doesn't really change. And then commercial agreements that teams have with TOs can still continue as long as they're not linked to participation in events. So it's not going to kind of, as Mark said, it's not going to completely seismically flip everything upside down. So from our point of view, we're still probably going to, champion Cologne and Katowice. Those are, the grand slams of Counter-Strike. I think the majors, which are now going to probably move towards the end of each half of the year, are going to provide a really interesting narrative and kind of build-up structure to each season, which didn't exist up till this point. And it will facilitate the kind of de facto transfer window because it was already happening now. People will start using the end of the major as the de facto transfer window. So I think from our point of view, Pro League may get a bit shorter, which we already announced, The rest of our events will probably not seismically change, of course, apart from the qualification, but it's still going to be the tournaments that our fans in Europe and around the world as we go to Brazil, as we go to Dallas, and China is on the calendar for next year. We're going to keep spreading the gospel.
I'm really excited to see it. I'm really excited to hear that. Kristina, do you think, slightly spicy question, but do you think that there are too many Counter-Strike events? And does that affect the growth of the scene? Because there's so much to follow.
Well, I think that there is definitely a lot to follow, but I think that what makes it good is that they're sort of sprinkled all over the world. So, you know, now for IEM Sydney, you know, like a lot of Europeans can't even watch these events because they're literally on the other side of the world, which makes it really hard, you know. So given esports as a sort of concept in general is very international, I think that there sort of needs to be a lot of events to be able to cover the entire world. Then if it's too many events, well, it can be sort of hard for teams as well because, you know, burnout among players is a really real thing. So, I mean, it can be really hard. And if you look at just teams trying to practice for CS2, you know, some teams like barely had any time practicing because they were playing in, you know, the Blast Showdown and the ESL Pro League before. So I mean, in that sense, it can be really rewarding, sort of also having to play in the EM tournament in Sydney. So I mean, it can be hard for teams and not to be able to play with full capacity all the time. So, well, it's a two-edged sword. Like, it's good for CSGO like fans that there are so many events, but it can also build burnout in teams and players.
I have literally worked events with teams where they've been playing 2 events at the same time. It is, especially for a team like Nine, I don't know if that's ever happened for your team, because I've definitely experienced some of the non-partner teams have to go through that.
Yeah, it has happened, but online tournaments. So not in the sense, like, I think it was Eternal Fire that during a Pro League had like a LAN and an online at the same time, right? But I definitely think in terms of qualifications, as said Alex, and looking at the world ranking that Valve is going, or has put up and is hopefully going to keep, getting better and better, I do think that we're going to see teams grinding it out and maybe do see some getting burned out. And I think we're going to see some of the teams that are in the tier 1 space now that kind of needs to be grinding more, maybe, depending on their world ranking, right? Because that is how they were going to qualify. And, you know, that would be interesting to see how that pans out, I think.
Yeah, I think I would add to that the ranking is critical, because at the moment the ranking is designed to basically incentivize you to keep collecting points, because you can never collect too many points. I think we were looking at ESL internally, working with them to try and make sure that we could avoid that by using best of tournaments like they do in the tennis. So because in tennis you only have your top 10 events are counted, you are therefore not incentivized to grind as much. If you have a good run, you are rewarded by being able to sit out a few more events, because your points won't count. They won't be better than the ones you've already accumulated. So I think over time the ecosystem, hopefully with Valve understanding this process and accepting this process, they will understand that this really has an important role in helping avoid burnout. And also, to your point, then you won't have every team playing at every event, so you won't get the same matches, because you'll kind of almost create a much more organic but clear tiering of tournaments. And then the last point I would make about too much CSGO formats. I think we can experiment a lot more with formats, and the more different formats we have, then I think that also just makes things a little bit more interesting, a little bit more spicy. This is a different configuration. So I think if we focus on ranking, we focus on formats, I think we will get away from the problem of just having too many of the same events time and time again.
Yeah, people on Reddit, they come round to different formats. I miss Blast Pro Series. It was a great format. It was so much fun, and it was absolute chaos, but I was there for it. Before we end, because I know we want to see if we've got time for questions, I'd love to get a bold prediction from each of you for the future of CS2, starting with Patrick on the end.
Oh, wow. Bold predictions. No, I think in the next few years we're going to see a world champion or a winner of a tier 1 event that does come from one of the current successful regions. Maybe a boring answer. I don't dare to talk about player base. I don't dare to talk about viewership so far, but maybe someone else can excite you. So, Alex?
Oh, God, I'm not good at these. Yeah, look, I think I'd love to predict that North America comes back storming. I think they've had a tough few years in the CS space. I would love to feel that the changes that we make, and maybe we keep pushing Valve to kind of keep focusing on America, that it's a market that needs a little bit of extra watering. I'd love to see North America come back in force. We saw a lot of people who had moved to Valorant starting to have their kind of antenna twitching when they saw CS2 coming. We saw the streamers obviously coming in as well. So I'd love North America, whether it's through streaming, whether it's through the esports side, whether it's both, and events, of course. I'd love to see that come back.
That was such a PR copium answer, and I am all here for it, Alex. Yes, North America, they're going to go great in Counter-Strike 2.
Well, I think that CS2 will, in all its essence, be ready for the RMR and be a great game. I do also think that people will kind of romanticize CSGO, and some people will like never think that CSGO is actually as good as CSGO will ever be. So I think we'll have that kind of a discussion going forward.
And Kristina?
Yeah, well, I'm more here from a product side of things, and perhaps even from like the betting industry, so to speak, since we're sort of in the convergence between esports and betting. But you know, as Alex said, you know, North America is really opening up for betting, and you know, CS:GO is sort of the largest esports for that. So I mean, it could be a perfect storm, whereas like this sort of new entertainment reaches America at the same time as CS2 becomes really big. So I mean, this could really be something huge in North America in terms of entertainment going forward.
Brilliant. Well, thank you ever so much, guys. I don't know if anyone's got any questions. Oh, hello, mate. How are you doing? Tom at the front.
Hello. Patrick, you mentioned that you love the anticipation going into League and Worlds. Riot owns League of Legends. Is the only way out of this condensed tournament schedule for Valve to own the tournaments as well?
If I think it's only down to a game developer being very hands-on, because in comparison, I'm not saying that Valve is doing a poor job in that regard, but Riot is obviously running their own show in a sense, right? For most of the time. No, I think it's more of taking a bit of a helicopter view of what are we trying to do, where do we want to be, how do we inspire, how do we bring a more mainstream recognition back to Counter-Strike. I do think, looking also at the age demographic of our title, we will probably speak about bold predictions. I think we're just a few years away from having probably the first champion being in his or her 40s. That's quite amazing. You don't have that in any other title. I think the average age of a competitor in League of Legends is like 22 or something like that. It's different in Counter-Strike. It's very beautiful, right? It's been around for so long. That to me means that we have such a rich history. We have so many great moments. We have so many great tournaments. We have competitors, athletes, talent, content creators all around the world. That I think perhaps League of Legends has done better to kind of get all those pieces coming together more in terms of, you know, lead up to the tournaments. What does this mean in the wider ecosystem? It's much harder obviously with Counter-Strike because there's just so many events, there's so many different circuits, but it's not as simple as saying Valve needs to do this and that. I think we all have a role to play in that, and I hope we are not too far away from having some of those great moments. Many of them happen behind the scenes actually, more told to the world. We're looking at Drive to Survive is a good example. Many uses that example, but I will also do it. I think something like that could really be explosive and important for Counter-Strike's next chapter.
Great question. Fabulous question. Any more? Brilliant. Well, thank you ever so much to Patrick, to Alex, to Marcus, and to Kristina. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.